I can still see the moment clearly. I pushed back from the kitchen chair, and my heart was pounding so loud it felt like it might tear out of my ribs. The plane tickets on my laptop threw a pale blue light across the room. A round trip to San Diego. 2 passengers, me and my 8-year-old son, Ethan Pierce. One click of the mouse sounded in my head like an oath. It's over, Clara. 3 years of living in the shadow of that absence end today. 3 years earlier, Daniel Pierce, my husband, had been declared dead after a strange accident on a business trip. There was no body. There was only a terse report and a death certificate handed to me with the sort of sympathy people practice for bad news. I remember that day like a bruise that won't fade, standing in the same kitchen, holding Ethan while a shaking colleague whispered, "He's gone." "I'm so sorry." I sank to the floor as if the room had split open and swallowed us. After that, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I had loved Daniel with a kind of blind faith that let me excuse the late nights, the constant one more call, the slow coolness creeping into our conversations. I told myself he was building something for us, that he'd come back. Then he vanished. Or so I believed. I promised for Ethan's sake I would keep going. I sold my wedding ring to help with the mortgage, took a full-time position at the local bank, and filled every spare hour with work so that the silence wouldn't have room to breathe. When Ethan asked about his father, which he did rarely, but each time pierced me like a blade, I smoothed my voice and said whatever I thought he needed to hear. For 3 years I practiced smiling even when my insides felt hollow. Buying the tickets to San Diego was more than a selfish desire for sun and sand. It was a promise I'd made to myself, to try to live again, to teach my boy that life can hold more than one kind of sorrow. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and let out a breath that tasted like relief and fear mixed together. Ethan came running in from the living room as soon as he heard, "We're going to the beach." He flung his arms around me and murmured, "You'll be happier there, right, Mommy?" I didn't have a perfect answer. Maybe I would be, maybe I wouldn't. But I knew this was a beginning. Once my life had looked like the pages of a glossy magazine. Daniel wasn't just good-looking. He had that effortless charisma that made strangers listen when he spoke and made me laugh when I needed it most. I was 25, a junior loan officer trying to carve out a career, when he walked into the bank with a confidence that made the room tilt. By the end of our first meeting, I was smitten. We married within a year. In the beginning, it was everything we'd promised one another. Weekend hikes in the Rockies, wine beneath the stars, spontaneous road trips. Daniel moved into financial brokerage and began climbing fast. I felt swell of pride standing beside him at firm events, his arm around me like a promise. Then Ethan arrived, our little miracle, and I assumed all that restless ambition would ease. I pictured bedtime stories replacing late calls. I was wrong. Daniel's work swallowed more of him. He traveled for meetings and deals in cities I'd barely heard of. Months would pass with nothing but a hurried kiss at dawn or a tired peck at bedtime. I tried to raise the subject gently. Then, with growing desperation, "Daniel, you're missing his childhood," I said one night, holding back the tears. He held me, kissed my hair, and promised it was temporary, a season of hard work to secure our future. I wanted to trust him. I did, until the day he didn't come home. At first, I assumed it was another trip he'd forgotten to mention. Then his phone went straight to voicemail. For 3 days, I told Ethan, "Daddy's busy, sweetheart. He'll be back." The dread in my chest tightened. On the 4th day, the call came. An accident. A snowmobile breaking through thin ice on a remote Idaho river, a current so fierce rescue divers couldn't recover a body. I remember the cold, hollow sound of those words and how my knees buckled. Ethan looked at me with wide, puzzled brown eyes as I clutched the phone to my chest. They issued a death certificate a week later, a neat legal paper that made the loss official but didn't answer anything. I buried an empty urn because there was nothing else to put in the ground. There was no closure, only silence. In that silence, I built walls so high that even Ethan noticed. "Mommy, why don't you smile anymore?" he asked one night. I forced a smile because what else could I do? I told myself I was healing. I went through the motions. Paying bills, fixing leaky faucets, showing up at Ethan's soccer games and clapping from the sidelines just for the two of us. The city around us grew quieter. Friends called less. Life continued for others. Grief, I learned, sticks like glue. You can scrub and scrape, but it remembers. That was why the San Diego trip mattered so much. It wasn't just a week of beaches. It was an attempt to breathe again. I had no idea how quickly the careful seams I'd stitched would begin to fray. 3 years had changed everything and nothing at all. But as I stood there in the kitchen, plane tickets folded on my lap, and Ethan's small weight against me, I felt the first tremor of something I hadn't dared to hope for. Maybe, just maybe, a way forward. Mine felt frozen, like winter that refused to thaw. I buried myself in work at the bank, built a rigid routine with no room for feelings, and clung to Ethan as if he were my lifeline. He became the reason behind everything I did. On mornings when I wanted nothing more than to stay in bed, I forced myself up with the reminder, he needs breakfast. He needs school. He needs you to be strong. Ethan grew so quickly it startled me. One moment I was showing him how to tie his shoelaces, and the next he was lecturing me on which superhero movies I just had to see. And lately the questions about his father had crept back in. They always came softly, like secrets whispered in the dark at bedtime. "Mom, do you think Dad can see me? Or when I grow up, will I even remember what he looked like?" I gave the best answers I could. But each one felt like I was erasing Daniel Pierce, painting over him with vague promises of a man who had worked too hard, but loved his son very much. The truth was, I hadn't dealt with my grief at all. I'd shelved it like an old book I was too afraid to open, but even ignored shelves sag eventually under the weight. One evening, after tucking Ethan in, I found myself scrolling through vacation deals online. I hadn't traveled anywhere since before Daniel's death. At first, it felt wrong, like I was betraying something sacred. But then I glanced at Ethan's closed door and thought, he deserves happy memories too. That's how I ended up booking 2 tickets to San Diego, 1 beachside hotel room, and a week off work. It felt reckless, like plunging into icy water, but also freeing. It wasn't about beaches or sunshine. It was about giving myself permission to live again. When I told Ethan, his eyes widened, his mouth dropping open as though I'd just granted him a superpower. "The beach? For real?" he shouted, bouncing on the couch. He squeezed me so tightly I could barely breathe and whispered, "You'll smile more there, right, Mom?" That question lodged deep in my chest, sharp and unmovable. I kissed his hair and said, "I'll try, sweetheart. I'll really try." That night, I stood at the window, watching Denver's city lights flicker. My life looked nothing like the one I'd once dreamed of. With Daniel, I'd pictured champagne glasses clinking on some European balcony. Now even a short trip to California felt like scaling a mountain. Still, as I folded Ethan's favorite swim trunks into the suitcase, a flicker of something long forgotten stirred inside me. Maybe this is the start of something better. I couldn't have known then how right, and how wrong, that thought would prove to be. The morning of our flight, Ethan buzzed with excitement, dragging his small rolling suitcase across the hardwood floor, the wheels clattering like drumbeats. "San Diego, here we come," he shouted, his joy lighting up the house. For the first time in years, I felt a flutter of anticipation that I thought had died the day Daniel did. The airport was its usual storm of people, coffee cups in hand, security lines winding endlessly, announcements blaring. Ethan held my hand the whole time, his small fingers squeezing mine, a mixture of nerves and excitement. Once on the plane, he pressed his face to the window and whispered, "We're really going, Mom. We're really doing this. The flight settled into calm. Passengers pulled out headphones, books, neck pillows. I tried to relax, reminding myself this was about new memories. Then Ethan's brow furrowed as he stared down the aisle. He tugged on my sleeve. "Mom, is that Dad?" My heart stuttered. I turned my head slowly. 2 rows ahead, a man sat angled toward a blonde woman, speaking with easy gestures. A wide-brimmed hat shaded most of his face, dark sunglasses covering the rest. But the slope of his shoulders, the way his hands moved, it was all achingly familiar. I forced a brittle laugh. "Sweetheart, no. You must be mistaken." But then he shifted, and my stomach dropped to ice. That scar, a tiny mark under his jawline, one I'd kissed 100 times in another life. "Mom," Ethan whispered urgently. "I'm serious." "That's Dad." I couldn't breathe. For 3 years, I had told myself Daniel was gone, had buried every shred of hope. And yet, here I was, staring at a man who looked exactly like him, alive, laughing with another woman. I squeezed Ethan's hand. "It's probably just someone who looks like him. People look alike, honey." But my trembling voice betrayed me. I turned back to the window, willing myself calm, though every part of me screamed to look again. As the plane lifted, I stole glances. The way he leaned in when listening, the subtle tap of his fingers against the armrest, just as Daniel used to when thinking. I told myself it wasn't possible, that grief was cruel, playing tricks on me. But beneath it all, a dangerous whisper rose. What if it really is him? The rest of the flight passed in silence, my thoughts circling between shock, fury, and the most perilous emotion of all, hope. When we landed and passengers gathered their bags, I made a choice. I stayed seated. Maybe because I couldn't bear to confirm it, or maybe because I already knew the truth. But Ethan wasn't done. He looked at me, eyes wide and insistent. "Mom," he looked right at me, and he smiled. Just like that, my world tilted. San Diego greeted us with warm air and the tang of salt. Ethan bubbled over with excitement, pointing out how big the ocean waves must be, how he couldn't wait to build the greatest sandcastle ever. I smiled, trying to ground myself in his joy, but my mind stayed with that man on the plane. Coincidence, I told myself. People have doubles. That scar, that posture, that hand draped casually over the seat back, those details were too specific, too real. And children don't imagine things like that, not with such certainty. By the time we reached the hotel, I had almost convinced myself to let it go. Almost. This trip was supposed to be about healing, not dragging old ghosts back from the grave. Our hotel room had a balcony that overlooked the ocean, and when Ethan saw it, he gasped like someone had just handed him treasure. He spent the evening bouncing between the window and the TV, rambling about seashells, dolphins, and sandcastles. For a few hours, life almost felt normal again. That night, after Ethan drifted into sleep, I stepped onto the balcony. The ocean breeze was cool, the air filled with the hush of waves. For a moment it felt peaceful, until the voices rose from the balcony just below mine. At first, I paid little attention. Couples fought on vacation all the time. But then my whole body stiffened. That voice, the sharp rhythm of it, frustration dripping from every word. "Do you ever care about anything besides money?" My hands clutched the railing, blood draining from my knuckles. I didn't need to hear every word. I knew that cadence. That voice had lived in my veins for years. Then a younger woman snapped back, "Don't start with me, Daniel. I told you what I wanted from the beginning." Daniel. My breath hitched. My knees nearly gave way. I leaned just far enough over the railing to see. And there he was. Same broad shoulders, same familiar gestures. The hat and sunglasses he'd worn on the plane were gone. No question remained. Daniel Pierce, my dead husband, was standing one floor below me, very much alive, very much arguing with another woman. My first instinct was to rush down, demand answers, scream 3 years' worth of questions into his face, but my feet stayed rooted. I just stood there, trembling, listening. "You think dragging me to some cheap hotel in San Diego makes up for everything?" she yelled. "It's a 4-star hotel, Chloe," he snapped back. Chloe. So that was her name. I staggered backward, pressing a hand over my mouth. My heart broke all over again, not from losing him, but from realizing he'd been alive all this time, living a life I was never even allowed to know existed. When I finally went back inside, Ethan stirred in his sleep, mumbling, "Mom." I knelt by his bed, brushing the hair from his forehead. "Shh, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." He sighed and rolled over, blissfully unaware that his world had just been rewritten. Mine had too. He's alive, I kept thinking. Daniel is alive, and I had no idea what to do with that truth. The next morning, I hoped it had all been some cruel dream. But one glance at the balcony below crushed that hope. Daniel Pierce was alive, breathing, laughing, staying one floor beneath me with a woman named Chloe. I moved through the day on autopilot, smiling for Ethan as we explored the beach. But inside, my chest felt tight, every breath like it belonged to someone else. I told myself I'd let it go, focus only on my son. But by nightfall, curiosity and rage had hollowed me out. After Ethan fell asleep, I slipped on oversized sunglasses, tied my hair back, and headed for the hotel bar. The place was dim, humming with soft jazz and the clink of glasses. And there he was, Daniel, alone, nursing a drink. He looked older, worn down, but unmistakably him. My body moved before I could think. I slid onto a stool 2 seats away. "Rough night?" I asked, keeping my voice light, casual. He glanced up, startled, then gave a weary half-smile. "You could say that. God, that voice. It washed over me like a wave. Want to talk about it?" I pressed, pretending to be just another curious stranger. He shrugged. "Girlfriend drama. You know how it is. I nearly choked. Girlfriend drama. This man had faked his death, left his wife and child in ruins, only to bicker about hotel stars with someone new. She doesn't get me," he went on, swirling his drink. "Thinks I'm just some old guy trying to act young. Maybe she's right." He looked at me then, eyes narrowing like he was trying to place me. I ducked my head, heart pounding. "What do you want her to see?" I asked softly. He gave a bitter laugh. "That I'm more than just a guy with money. That I've been through hell and back. That I'm trying to do better. But nobody ever sees the big picture." He shook his head. "Forget it. You don't want my sob story." "I'm a good listener," I whispered, my throat tight. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. 3 years ago, I lost everything. Thought I was finished. Had to start over. Leave people behind. I didn't want to leave. But sometimes you just disappear. Disappear. That's what he called it, abandoning us. I wanted to scream, to tear the truth out of him, to drag him upstairs to see the boy sleeping soundly. The son who'd cried for him night after night, but I didn't. I sat there, nodding like a stranger while my entire world burned. Daniel drained his glass, stood, and gave me a polite nod. "Thanks for listening. You're easier to talk to than most people I know." I forced a smile. "Anytime." Then he walked away, leaving me shaking, caught between fury and something I despised feeling. Relief. Relief that the face, the voice, the man were real. That he hadn't been just a ghost. But that truth carried a heavier weight. What was I going to do about it? The following afternoon should have been perfect. The sun was warm but gentle, the air salted with the promise of new beginnings. Ethan was on the sand, shaping towers for what he proudly called the strongest castle in California. I sat on a striped towel, sipping water, almost forgetting Daniel. Almost. The sound of shouting cut through the steady crash of the waves. I turned instinctively, scanning the crowded shoreline until my eyes landed on her. Sienna, the woman I'd seen on the balcony. She was kneeling in the sand beside a motionless figure. My stomach twisted. It was him. Daniel. He was lying on his side, pale and frighteningly still, one arm bent awkwardly beneath him. Sienna was panicked, yelling his name, shaking his shoulder, but he didn't stir. For a fleeting second, I considered staying put. After all, he wasn't my responsibility anymore. But then I saw Ethan staring, his small hands clutching his sand shovel like a shield. "Mom, is that?" he whispered. "Stay here, sweetheart," I said quickly, already sprinting across the beach. When I reached Daniel, his breathing was shallow, his pulse faint, but there. Training from an old CPR course resurfaced. I rolled him carefully onto his back, tilting his head to clear his airway. "He's still breathing," I muttered, half to myself, half to Sienna, who was still crying uncontrollably, probably heat exhaustion or dehydration. I shaded his face with my towel. "Go get help. Now." She nodded, bolting toward the hotel. And there I was, kneeling in the sand beside the man who had faked his death and left me to grieve. A part of me wanted to step away, to let him fend for himself. But my body betrayed me, hands steady on his wrist, instincts demanding I keep him alive. His eyelids fluttered and he groaned, voice hoarse and disoriented. "Claire," I froze. He knew me. "Yes," I whispered. "It's me." His eyes opened, confusion swirling as they locked onto mine. You're really here. Alive. Just like you," I said, my voice sharp with anger I could barely contain. A staff member rushed over with a first aid kit, helping Daniel sit up and sip some water. Sienna hovered close, glaring at me like I was the intruder. Maybe in her world I was, but Daniel's eyes never left mine. "Claire, please," he rasped. "We need to talk." I stood, brushing sand from my legs, my expression unreadable. "Not here tonight, 10 o'clock. "The bar." He nodded, looking shaken, not just from collapsing, but from the reality of me standing there after 3 years of silence. When I returned to Ethan, he had abandoned his sandcastle, his face pale with confusion. "Mom, is that really Dad?" I crouched, pulling him close. "We'll talk about it later, sweetheart. For now, let's head inside." As we walked back toward the hotel, my thoughts spiraled. Tonight I would finally get answers, and I couldn't decide which scared me more, that Daniel had a reason for what he did, or that he didn't. That night the bar was quieter than before. Dim lights, soft jazz, only a handful of guests scattered around. I arrived early, needing time to steady myself. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, so I gripped my glass of water like it was an anchor. At exactly 10 Hus, Daniel appeared. No hat, no sunglasses, no disguise. Older now, with lines etched around his mouth and streaks of gray in his hair, but undeniably him. My husband, my supposedly dead husband. He approached slowly, almost reverently. "Claire?" His voice cracked like a prayer. I didn't answer at first. I simply stared, letting the silence press against him until I finally spoke. "You have 2 minutes. Explain why I buried an empty urn and spent 3 years raising your son alone." He flinched, rubbing his hands together like a man trying to wash something off that never would. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I had to disappear, Claire. I had no choice." "No choice?" My voice trembled despite my resolve. "You chose to fake your death. You chose to make me tell our little boy his father was gone forever. Make me understand that, Daniel." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "I was in trouble. Real trouble. That investment I told you about, it wasn't just business. I borrowed from people who don't forgive failure. When the deal collapsed, they came after me. And you," I blinked, disbelief warring with fury. "So instead of trusting me, you staged an accident. You abandoned us because lying was easier than the truth. It wasn't easier. His voice cracked. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But if I'd stayed, you and Ethan would have been targets. I cut ties, changed my name, paid back every cent. I've spent 3 years building a life where no one could hurt us again. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. And Sienna? Is she part of this safe life? He flinched again, then nodded. I met her later. She doesn't know about my past. I crossed my arms, glaring. So you let me drown in grief while you played house with someone else. Do you have any idea what that did to us? His gaze dropped, shame radiating from him. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I had to see you. I had to see Ethan. I had to know if there was even a chance to make things right. The tears came then, but not for him. For me. For the years I clawed my way through grief while he hid behind a new name and a new woman. You don't get to decide when to come back, I said coldly. You don't get to walk in and act like we can just rewind. Claire, please, he begged, reaching for me. Let me be a father again. Let me explain to Ethan. I stood, pushing my chair back. Tomorrow, 11 a.m. at the cafe. You can see him. After that, we'll see where it goes. Then I walked out, legs trembling, spine unyielding. I finally had the truth, but it wasn't closure. It was the beginning of another storm, one I wasn't sure I could survive. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, lying stiff on the bed and staring at the ceiling. Doubt pressed down on me like a weight. Agreeing to let Daniel see Ethan felt like opening a door I had welded shut 3 years ago. What if it tore him apart all over again? What if it reopened wounds we had just learned to live with? Ethan woke up cheerful, completely unaware of the storm inside me. Do they have pancakes, Mom? Please tell me they have pancakes, he asked, tugging on his sneakers. I forced a smile. They have pancakes, sweetheart. Don't worry. By the time we reached the hotel cafe, Daniel was already there, tucked into a corner booth, drumming his fingers nervously on the table. Ethan froze when he saw him. His little face scrunched up like he was trying to solve a puzzle too big for him. Mom, he whispered. That's him. That's really Dad, isn't it? I nodded slowly. Yes, honey, that's your dad. Ethan didn't rush into his arms like a movie scene. Instead, he walked carefully to the table and stopped in front of Daniel, studying him. Daniel's eyes glistened as he knelt to meet his son's gaze. Hey, buddy, he said softly, voice breaking. It's me. It's Dad. Ethan's lip trembled. But you were gone. Mom said you... His words faltered. Daniel's face crumpled. I know. And I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you and your mom, but I hurt you instead. For a moment, neither moved. Then slowly, Ethan stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Daniel's neck. Daniel clung to him like he might never let go, shoulders shaking. I turned away, blinking fast, because whatever my feelings were, Ethan had just gotten a missing piece of his heart back. They sat together, and Daniel ordered pancakes and orange juice for Ethan, coffee for himself. At first, the conversation was hesitant. Ethan asked where he had been, what he had done. Daniel answered vaguely but honestly, traveling for work, fixing problems. I let him speak, resisting the urge to jump in. At one point, Ethan leaned closer. Did you miss me? Daniel's throat worked as he swallowed. More than anything in the world, that was enough. Ethan's smile bloomed, small at first, then wide, and he launched into chatter about school, soccer, and the sandcastle he had built yesterday. Daniel listened like every word was a treasure, laughing and nodding at all the right moments, his eyes fixed on his son. After breakfast, Ethan tugged Daniel's hand. Can you come to the beach with us today, please? Daniel looked at me, silently asking permission. I hesitated, then nodded. For the next hour, the three of us walked the shoreline. Daniel and Ethan built sandcastles side by side, laughing when the tide swallowed their towers. Watching them felt like watching a dream I'd once had come to life, one I thought I'd buried. My heart ached with gratitude for Ethan, but also grief for everything we had lost. When it was time to leave, Ethan hugged his dad again. "Can we see you tomorrow too?" Daniel glanced at me. "We'll see, buddy. One step at a time." On the way back, Ethan's voice bubbled with hope. "Mom, maybe he can come home with us. Maybe we can be like before." I couldn't answer, because I didn't know. The door I'd sealed shut was wide open now, and what came through might change everything, for better or worse. That evening, after Ethan fell asleep, I sat on the balcony staring at the endless ocean. The waves rolled calm and steady, nothing like the chaos in my chest. Seeing Daniel with Ethan had healed something I didn't even realize was still raw. But it also unearthed pain I had worked so hard to bury. A soft knock on the glass made me turn. Daniel stood there, tentative. I let him step out. He stayed a careful distance away. "He's amazing," Daniel said quietly. "You've done such a good job with him, Claire." I crossed my arms. "I didn't have a choice. You were gone." He nodded, guilt etched deep on his face. "I know, I can't take that back. But I want to be in his life now. Even if you never forgive me, please don't shut me out from him." I studied him, searching for a trace of the man I had married. The man I had once trusted more than anyone. "You don't get to walk back into our lives and pretend we can pick up where we left off," I said firmly. "You faked your death, Daniel. You left me to explain to our son why his father was gone forever. That doesn't just disappear because you feel guilty now." He lowered his head. "I'm not asking you to take me back. I know I lost that right. I'm asking for a chance to be Ethan's dad again. I'll take it slow. I'll respect your boundaries. Just don't keep me away from him." The only sound for a long moment was the rush of the waves. Part of me wanted to tell him to vanish again and stay gone, but I couldn't ignore Ethan's face when he hugged his dad, or the sound of his laughter on the beach. "You can be in his life," I said finally, voice low but steady, "but on my terms. You'll call before visits, no surprise appearances. And if you ever lie to him again about anything, we're done. Permanently." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you. I promise, Claire, I won't mess this up again." I turned back to the sea. "Good, because I'm not the woman you left behind. I built a life without you, and I'm proud of it. I don't need you, Daniel. Ethan doesn't need you to be perfect. He just needs you to be honest." Daniel's eyes shone. "You're stronger than I remember." "I had to be," I said softly. "You made sure of that." He left quietly. I stayed, letting the salty breeze dry tears I hadn't realized had spilled. This wasn't the fairy tale reunion Ethan might have imagined, but it was honest. And honesty, at least, was something I could live with, even if Daniel's role in our lives remained small, guarded and uncertain. Later, when I tucked Ethan in, he stirred in his sleep and whispered, "Mom, we're happy, right?" I brushed his hair from his forehead and kissed it. "Yes, sweetheart. We're happy, and we're going to be okay." For the first time in 3 years, I believed it.